Let's zoom in on the first game today, specifically the Cowboys. And three guys who are major fantasy assets. Two of them well outperforming their ADPs. The other one slightly underperforming ADPs. I have talked about each on this podcast over the last few months. And I think for the last time, because this podcast will be shutting down for the season in about 10, 11 days, I want to talk about them just to kind of sum up where things stand and how we can think differently and I think smarter on these three guys, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and George Pickens. This summer I was very high on Dak Prescott, talked about him on this podcast, talked about him on the blog. Seemed to be ridiculously undervalued, gave all the reasons why. Today he is I think he's the QB6 in terms of fantasy points per game. That's pretty good. He's the QB5 in overall fantasy points. That's pretty good too. And I'm saying that in an understated way. Pretty good is pretty good. He lost his quote unquote number one wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb, for several games, and he's still near elite. You consider that he started the summer, I think his ADP was like QB 13 or QB 14. And he finished off the summer in terms of like entering week one, he was the QB 11 behind Brock Purdy and Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, and others, not to mention Jaden Daniels. So Prescott is one of those guys who consistently, I think, undervalued or consistently valued around his midpoint to his high floor, and has the ability, if he and his core guys stay healthy and active, productive, can achieve great success in fantasy. We have seen that play out this season. And his ADP next year will probably be around, if this finishes out the way, it started, these first 15 games, and he'll probably be top 8 next summer. I think some people will be cautious about pushing him too high because of his age, advancing age, getting into the mid 30s. I get that. And yet at the same time, he'll be 33. So it's not like, difference between 32 and 33 is not a big deal for a quarterback who doesn't need to run a lot to be successful. And Dak Prescott actually runs less than most, good to great quarterbacks these days, and it suits him just fine. He has two amazing wide receivers, and he has a very good and recently underutilized tight end and a running back who, the owner, Jerry Jones, wants to keep, happy, which is a good sign, for a team that, will probably be a little more competitive, one would think, next season. We'll see. The wide receivers, are still, people are still debating this, and I understand why. And it's something that I brought up several weeks ago. I raised the question, hey, is CeeDee Lamb elite? Why do we talk about CeeDee Lamb as an elite wide receiver? And I said that as someone who, a couple years earlier, when he broke through, whatever it was, 2023, I drafted him. I was thrilled with him. He had over 400 fantasy points, and he was my anchor. He was a steal. I got him, I think it was the early second round, late first, early second round, whatever his ADP was. I got him around there, maybe a pick or two earlier. And I knew in the moment, I was really happy. I had basically an alpha receiver with a very good quarterback and not much competition below him. That's exactly what I wanted. That's the playbook for getting a wide receiver that you can start every week, and depending on ADP, is a bargain. Jackson Smith and Jigba is part of that playbook as well, and I've talked about him. But then there's George Pickens. And a few weeks ago on this podcast, I raised the question, why are we talking about CeeDee Lamb as elite? What if George Pickens is actually the alpha in this receiver core? Or if not alpha, it's 1AA would be Pickens, the highest level, and CeeDee Lamb is 1A. And essentially Pickens is just a cut above CeeDee Lamb. Is that possible? Can we at least discuss that? And some people on the blog got back to me and said, no, CeeDee Lamb is the number one. That's it. And I get why. And some people who drafted CeeDee Lamb are hopeful that he is the number one, and end of story. And others remember what he did in 2023 and say, well, He obviously is still that great player. He's just had some injury issues, whatever else. I would argue, no, after a few more weeks, we can see that George Pickens is a co-leader in that receiver corps. When you add in the fact that Pickens is 2 years younger, only 24, CeeDee Lamb is 26, there is a world where Pickens is still ascending, which is scary to think about how good he could be. Doing an apples to apples comparison, when CeeDee Lamb returned in week 7, after he missed some games, he had 22 points right off the bat, fantasy points. He was rocking and rolling just like he before he got hurt. There was no ramp up needed, and he's been consistently good to very good every single week, scoring between 11.1 points and 24.2 points. His average since week 7, since his return, is 16.9 fantasy points a game. That is very good. Not elite. Hate to say it. It's not elite. And I don't know who I'm saying I hate to say it to, because I don't hate to say things that are true. And if I had CeeDee Lamb, I would still love to say it because it is true, and maybe it would make me smarter and think differently in future seasons. That someone who is getting 16.9 fantasy points a game over the course of the season is, essentially a back-end top 10 fantasy wide receiver. Very good wide receiver, but not someone you draft in the first round, and maybe not even someone you draft in the early second round. That's a different way of thinking for CeeDee Lamb over the past few years. George Pickens, by comparison, he has done a little bit better than CeeDee Lamb. Instead of 16.9 points for Lamb, Pickens has averaged 17.5. Again, apples to apples. This is since week 7 when CeeDee Lamb returned. I'm not counting CeeDee Lamb getting hurt or the pre-injury or anything like that. I'm just looking at it during this phase when George Pickens had the opportunity, when Lamb was sidelined, to step out and step up. That essentially Pickens started the season, one could argue, feeling out what his role was. Because in those first 2 games, when CeeDee Lamb had 24 targets, Pickens had 13. Pickens scored in one of them, which was key, but he only had 8 catches to CeeDee Lamb's 16. CeeDee Lamb was the alpha. And then Lamb gets hurt, and then it gave Pickens an opportunity to develop that chemistry with Dak Prescott as the alpha. That from week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6, in those 4 weeks, he averaged roughly, and I'm approximating this, it was roughly 24 fantasy points a game. Incredible. Incredible production. And the fact that he has done better than CeeDee Lamb since Lamb returned merits some kind of conversation. We can't just brush it under the rug and pretend it did not happen. Another aspect of this is targets. That CeeDee Lamb actually is averaging 9.1 targets a game since returning in week 7. Pickens is averaging 9. So it's not as if Pickens is, getting a lot more targets, and that's why he's getting more points. And it's not as if Pickens is getting much fewer targets and is getting lucky, with touchdowns. None of that is accurate. Pickens has 3 receiving scores. CeeDee Lamb has 3 receiving scores. It just happens to be that Pickens is averaging slightly more fantasy points per target. That matters. It suggests that this is an even receiver corps, and it is not CeeDee Lamb as the alpha. Now, we've seen over the years, and I've pointed this out before with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, with 1 year with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and there's other examples too. I think for a while this year, I don't know if it's still true, but Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams were both top 10. It's possible for wide receiver teammates to be top 10 fantasy receivers. And it often the quarterback gets a huge bump for all the right reasons, because of that. Right now, on a points per game basis, Lamb and Pickens are top 10. That is probably going to continue as long as they stay on the field with Dak Prescott for these final 2 games. But heading into next year, we have to recognize that in all likelihood, no matter how this season ends up with these final 2 games, CeeDee Lamb's ADP, regardless of where he finishes, possibly behind Pickens on a per game, basis, wherever they finish, CeeDee Lamb's ADP is probably going to be better than Pickens because CeeDee Lamb has the reputation as an elite wide receiver, whereas Pickens is still seen, I believe, by the market as the beta, as a high level secondary receiver. And I would argue there is a buying opportunity there when it comes to ADP because I view these two as equal. And so therefore, whoever's ADP is worse, and I'm betting it's Pickens, that's the bargain I'm going for. I'm BJ Riddell, Fantasy Football for Winners. Follow me on the blog, email me anytime. Good luck if you've got guys playing today, and we'll see you tomorrow.